guys? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Davey and Nick here, being a preview and prediction for Florida versus Georgia, 3:30 Eastern Time on CBS. 22.5-point line in favor of the Bulldogs. 57 is the over/under. This one will be contested in Jacksonville, Florida, at TIAA Bank Stadium. Looking at the Gator offense, Nick, they're averaging over 30 points per contest, and the ground game will start there because these guys are terrific. This offensive line knew this was a great unit coming into the season, and they've certainly been exceeding expectations with Osiris Torrance coming over, following Billy Napier from Louisiana Lafayette, leading the way at right guard. I like this right side of Richard Gorge and Ethan White on the left side. This is an offensive line that has, no seniors, one big. I think 4 of these guys might come back next year. Maybe even Torrance comes back for another year. It remains to be seen, but they've been playing really good. They're, 4th in college football in fewest sacks allowed, 1st nationally in fewest tackles for loss allowed. Really paving the way for this ground game, led by Montreal Johnson, another ULL transfer, 425 yards, 7 touchdowns, averaging over 7 yards per carry. Anthony Richardson, 6 touchdowns, 395 yards, also averaging over 7 per touch on the ground. And then Trevor Etienne's been giving them some good work as well, 334 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns for him. Naquan Wright, another guy that gets involved a good bit in the backfield. This running game has been terrific, facing a really good Georgia defensive line. So obviously they're going to really battle tested there. I think this is a very winnable matchup for them, though. I know Bulldog fans will probably, laugh at that, but I think this is a very interesting matchup for them. Only ran for about $141 against Tennessee, and 136 against Kentucky. Had a field day against Utah, though, almost 300 yards rushing. LSU, Missouri, the last 3 games, they've been really good at running the ball. But you look at this offense, it's really held back by Anthony Richardson's, lack of development as a passer. 6 touchdowns, 7 picks on the year, 1,300 yards, completing 56%. Obviously, you know what he can do on the ground as a runner. He's really good at that. He has plenty of speed for his size. Cam Newton-like size, but he's got plenty of speed as well. The passing game's not been good. Only had 66 yards against Missouri, where the defense was on the field a lot because they're, they had a pick 6 in that game that kind of changed the game script. They had that one Tennessee game, though, where they had 453 yards. That's the only contest this year against a Power 5 opponent where they have 200-plus yards. Very strange. Obviously, that's a very poor secondary. But, they're now facing a really good secondary in Georgia. I don't think they match up very well one bit through the air because they don't have a lot of outside speed. Their receiving core is obviously not very productive. Ricky Pearsall, I think he can provide an interesting matchup for them. Justin Shorter is a big-time talent. Xavier Henderson, a possession guy that can catch balls for you at the marker. This is a very bad matchup for Florida's offense when you consider how bad the passing attack has been. And then, obviously, the rushing attack is very good. But when you face an elite defensive front, you get stuffed. They're going to be in a lot of trouble, Nick.
Right. This passing attack has just been poor. Anthony Richardson has not developed like we hoped he would. 56.5% completion percentage, 6 touchdowns, 7 interceptions through the air. Of course, Richardson has a lot of talent on his legs. Nearly 400 yards rushing, plus the 6 total touchdowns. And Montreal Johnson, this is a guy I highlighted in the preseason. I thought he'd have a really solid season. He was my breakout player of the year candidate. 425 yards on the ground, 7.2 yards per carry, plus the 7 touchdowns for him. I love this rushing attack, but when you go up against a defense, like you said in Georgia, this front 7 that is absolutely incredibly talented, stacked with guys who can really get after the ball, you're going to struggle and find yourself behind the game. And I just do not trust Anthony Richardson to play catch-up here. He's going to be making mistakes, throwing interceptions. And that Georgia secondary is going to have a field day. Justin Shorter, Ricky Pearsall, these guys are solid wide receivers, but neither of them have 20 catches so far this season. It's just Richardson throwing the ball is not really creating that opportunity for them. This offensive line is phenomenal, right? We knew this offensive line would be good, but not this good. They're having a really strong season. So I think that early on, there is some potential that Florida could pick up some big ground game. But I just think late in the game, they're going to find themselves behind. They have to throw the ball, and it's going to lead them to struggle.
Now, every time we talk about Florida, I talk about this, but I'm going to circle back to it because it was very true last year. But Anthony Richardson's turnovers seem to just be awful. It's not like they're up by 3 touchdowns and he fumbles. He does this in the most crucial times. He had a pick against USF late in that game when they were losing. That one was in the end zone. He had a fumble when they were in the red zone or they were almost there. They were well in plus territory. Fumbles against Tennessee when that was still a 1-score game. Kind of let things get away from him after that. And you can continue to name them. He had a pick 6 against Kentucky, for example, in a close game where they only lost by, a handful of points. And then I want to focus again on last year. It was almost 3-0 before the half. There was about 2 minutes to go in this game. Dan Mullen fighting for his job, and his quarterback just completely got him fired, really. They were about to walk into the locker room, 3-0, Nick, and then in a matter of moments, 24-0 after 3 straight Anthony Richardson turnovers. They just seem to be absolutely brutal, absolutely demoralizing for this football team. He has to protect the ball. No questions about it. If he has even just one turnover in this game, it's going to get away from him, as it always has, whenever he's been at quarterback over the last how many ever games. And when he does bad things, games get away from this football team. They cannot do this here if they want to pull off an upset.
Absolutely cannot turn the ball over. Has to protect the ball. That is the key thing here. These turnovers are always in bad times. Like I said, you just listed off a whole list of turnovers that were in terrible times. Seems like his clutch decision making just is not there. They're going to have to protect the ball at all possibility, because if they turn the ball over 1, 2, 3 times, this game totally runs away from them. They really will just be playing catch-up ball, which is not what they can do, because they just cannot throw the ball, and they did not need to be behind. If they want to have any prayer on Saturday, they have to get a lead early on.
Now looking at this Georgia offense, Stetson Bennett's come a long way. He's been around forever, it seems like. He's done a great job of just developing, unlike Richardson. Obviously, Bennett's been around much longer, had a lot more opportunities, and he's also around a much better supporting cast, much better system. But he's done a great job of developing. I think his ability to pick up on reads, identifying things pre-snap rather. He's also shown tremendous accuracy. He's also taking care of the football. Only 1 pick on the year. That was against Kent State, completing almost 71%. The numbers are good. A little north of 2,000 yards for him and 7 touchdowns. But this passing attack doesn't seem to win vertically as much as you'd think. They had a field day against Oregon, 368 yards in that one. Bennett, he was just terrific in that game. The entire team was. But, outside of that game, looking more so of the last 4, they had about 20 or 30 yards passing against Auburn in the first half. Missouri, he had 300+ in that one, but they were not winning downfield really one bit. They were behind in that game for like 55 minutes, so kind of padded the numbers there when you got a season-high 43 passing attempts. And then you kind of seen the same thing against Kent State. So this passing attack's been a little iffy as of late, but I think the potential is certainly there. Dominic Blaylock is back and healthy from a torn ACL. Just a slew of injuries for him. He's got 10 grabs on the year. Brock Bowers, of course, he's terrific. 26 grabs, team high 393 yards. He also tends to take a 70-yard jet sweep, it seems, every week. Yeah, look at this. 3 attempts, 82 yards, 3 touchdowns for Bowers, running the ball. So they do a lot of different things with him. They can line him up anywhere. Ladd McContney, he's had a lot of special teams errors, and, he's had some drops on offense, but he still leads the team with 29 grabs. I love that they're getting Darnell Washington involved, not just in the red zone either. They're getting him, wherever they are on the field. 16 grabs, 285 yards for him. He's showing off his athleticism. And then Kenny McIntosh, he's really showcasing his abilities as a pass catcher this year. 28 receptions, 270 yards. Kyrus Jackson, he's still there as well. A.D. Mitchell, I don't believe he's very healthy. Overall, this is a very deep receiving core for Georgia. A lot of mid-tier pass catchers. No one that really blows you away outside of Bowers, maybe Washington of his size. But these are very respectable players, kind of like Bennett, that were not very highly talked about coming into their career at Georgia. But they've developed very nicely. Great chemistry for them. I think the biggest thing for Georgia, they actually lead college football in time of possession. Kind of like last year, they only ran the ball. Their numbers were not, off the charts running the ball, only 191 yards per game. And, it's a little bit higher this year, 196. They do a good job of spreading it around. They're blowing these teams out. They're not overworking anybody. All their running backs have under 9 yards per or 9 attempts per game. Dejon Edwards has stepped up as the leading rusher. You have Kendall Milton, Kenny McIntosh, and I like Branson Robinson as well. He seems to be a good scheme fit here. So, moral of the story is with this offense, Nick, is they have plenty of guys they can roll out to make plays. They're as healthy as any team in college football right now, and they're facing a Florida defense that's coming off pretty poor effort against LSU. Obviously it's a rivalry game, and it's going to be tough sledding for this football team. But I do think Georgia's offense, with the rotation they have, with how good Bennett is playing, I think this is an offense that, despite some of the struggles, can start lighting things up at any moment.
Right, this is an offense that is by committee here. There's so many different guys that are getting involved early on and doing so many different things. I love the way they spread this offense out. Bennett, having a quiet, good season, not talked about a whole lot in the national scheme. People just think that he isn't that quarterback that he is now. People think he's still the same quarterback he was 2 years ago when he turned the ball over a few times against Alabama. Stetson Bennett, over 2,000 yards passing, nearly 71% completion percentage, 8.9 yards per attempt, 7 touchdowns to the air, plus the only 1 interception, 5 scores on the ground, and 115 for him as well. Brock Bowers continues to be a freak of nature, nearly 400 yards receiving, 15.1 yards per catch, 2 touchdowns for him, plus he can do it all with the 3 scores on the ground as well. Bowers is an absolute freak. And they have a great balance with McContney, Washington, McIntosh, all these guys having good catches as well. Dylan Bell as well, he's got a few catches. So I love the ability to kind of spread this offense out and play at their own tempo. They got a great time of possession, obviously number 1 in the nation. I love their ability to kind of have, like I said, scoring by committee. A lot of guys, multiple different guys have multiple touchdowns on the season. They spread it out. They have a different option. They can hit you with so many different type of things. The defense has to focus on so many different talented players that they can really spread it out. If one guy's not playing too well, they got 4 other guys who can back him up and really help out. I love the balance this offense has, and it's phenomenal to watch.
Yeah, the offensive line is a pretty young unit as well. It's one thing that really doesn't get talked about with this football team is they're not very experienced on this offensive line. I do think they're playing very good football. Of course, they've not been very tested that much either. And then you turn around now and look at a Florida defense that doesn't have much of a pass rush. Brenton Cox kind of underperforming this year. He had a great game. I think it was the Kentucky one where he was just doing everything for them. 8 TFL, handful of sacks. Utah game, rather, where he was doing everything for him. He's been great, I think, overall this season, Brenton Cox. Just because it doesn't always show up on the stat sheet doesn't mean a whole lot. But this is a team that has not really found much of a pass rush outside of Cox. Princely, he's stepping up on the D-line. Amari Burney, he has 4 sacks from his inside linebacker spot. Gervin Dexter, he's a force in the middle at defensive tackle, 6'6", 312. He's going to be looking to anchor against Cedric Van Pran, a more experienced center in the conference. The Florida defense, though, I think this was a unit I expected to kind of be better than they have so far. They're giving up 4.5 yards per carry, 15 touchdowns. Looks like outside of the Kentucky game, they're giving up 150-plus rushing in every contest this year. Tennessee, the tempo, had no problems there. LSU, it was really Jalen Daniels for the most part running the ball. He had 3 touchdowns in that one. This defense has been a mixed bag for me, Nick. I do think that the return of Ventrell Miller was going to be a lot bigger for this unit. It really hasn't, because the run defense, I think, have struggled a bit. He still has 49 tackles. Rashad Torrance at safety stepping up to 55 stops. Trey Dean, he's an enforcer. He's a player I think is going to have a big game here against Georgia rivalry. Big time hitter, 47 tackles on the year. You're going to hear his name called a lot, on CBS at 3:30. Overall, this is an interesting defense because you've had a lot of young guys have to get involved here, mixed in with some of those, older guys that we got a lot of hype in the offseason, like Gervin Dexter and Jason Marshall. The secondary, I think they have playmaking potential. Jaden Hill stepped up. I don't know what his health is. Jalen Kimber, former Georgia Bulldog, he's in this back end. So, big time opportunity here. Jaden Hill, he actually missed the first 4 games of the year. He returned over the last few, so that's certainly been a boost for these guys. I think they might match up better than the people anticipate, even though the secondary's really just been bad. 65% comp rate allowed this year, 70-plus completion percentage allowed in 3 of the last 4. I don't know how they're going to be able to match up in this one. I think if they can get some penetration, force Bennett off his mark, it's going to be a good way to do it. Slow down the run. I think they'll do a good job of slowing down the run in this game, despite what the stat sheet might say. This rivalry game, I think they're going to be amped up to slow down this Georgia grounded pound. But how will they do in the back end, especially containing back?
Really hasn't quite lived up to the hope that we'd see. Princely has 2 sacks leading the way. Gervon Dexter has 1.5 sacks. And Brenton Cox has 2 sacks as well. Amon Burley with 4 total sacks for him. Burley's a solid linebacker, 44 total tackles. Trey Dean, I love the way he can hit players. 47 total tackles for him. Dean, a big energy kind of guy. I really like what he can do. Rashad Torrance as well, 55 total tackles leading the team. Ventrell Miller, 50 tackles is certainly a lot, but you would have expected him to stop the run a little bit better. That the linebacking core just hasn't quite lived up to the expectations, the hope that we had. Front 7 just really isn't quite where we thought they were. Secondary's been solid at times. I think they have some cool pieces here that play well, but they just don't really kind of seem to be fitting quite as well so far this season. A guy like Kamari Wilson only has 20 total tackles. Trevon Johnson, 18 total tackles. I think this team will struggle against the balance Georgia has, because Georgia, if they can start to pick apart the run, they can start to throw the ball as well and kind of spread it out. I think Florida doesn't really excel in anything on defense at this point against the run or against the pass. So I think Georgia has the opportunity to kind of hit them on both fronts here and balance out this attack, and Florida can struggle.
One thing I said going into that Utah game back in week 1 is that the Utah tight ends are going to have a field day. I think they're going to win downfield up the seam with ease, and Brant Kuthi had a field day on him. I think he had almost, I think it was about 130 yards he had. He was just destroying this football team, and that's bad news because now you have to go against Brock Bowers, who's the best tight end I've ever seen. So it's obviously going to be a headache for them in the middle. I think you slow down the run game a bit, lets these linebackers and DBs cool off in the back end, and focus in on some of those guys like Bowers. Then it'll be a little bit easier, but I don't anticipate that happening. Should be a fun, interesting game though, because this defense last year, again, they held them to 3 points in the first half last year. Looking at the Georgia defense, they of course replaced numerous starters, only allowing 9.1 points per game so far this year. The defense is just picking up right where it left off last year. Only 247 yards allowed so far this year. Of course, they had a big game week 1 against Oregon, who's a completely different football team than they were on the 3rd of September. But for the most part, it's been a pretty dominant effort for the Bulldog defense. The Missouri game was interesting. They gave up a handful of big plays. They gave up some, I think it was like 2 or 3 scoring drives to Kent State. They still have not allowed 300-plus yards in a game since Oregon, who had 313, which is kind of crazy because they did struggle in that 2-game stretch against Kent State and Missouri. It feels like they aren't as dominant on the defensive line as they were a season ago. Of course, the numbers say otherwise. They're 4th nationally in run defense. Even Missouri, they ran off a few runs, only had 102 yards. Only 92 against Auburn. This is a dominant running game. 140 against Oregon, but other than that, they've been under, 100 yards the rest of the way. Jalen Carter, I know he was battling some health a couple weeks ago. I think he's full, good to go. Warren Brinson, he's a guy that stepped up on the D-line. Michael Williams has got involved, the freshman. Nazir Stackhouse. For the most part, it's really just been a defensive line by committee. I've not watched too much Georgia over the last couple of weeks, but I do know that that's really what it's been on this D-line. Zion Logue as well. Outside of Carter, it's pretty much by committee on this defensive front. I do like what Dumas Johnson at linebacker has done. He's really stepped up for them because that was another area, of concern. Not really concerned, but you were kind of curious who was going to step up. Nolan Smith, 6 TFL off the edge. He's been their top pass rusher with 3 sacks. This is going to be a big opportunity for him to really elevate his draft stock. Smail Munden as well. I know he's been battling some health as well, but overall, this front 7 for Georgia, they're as dominant as they were a season ago, I would say, up until this point. It's going to be very interesting to see, though. This is going to be their biggest test maybe all year in terms of, offensive line and running game. So this is a big opportunity to learn a lot about this Georgia defense. Even if they win by 30-plus points, we're certainly going to be keying in on a certain few areas to see how they've really improved. You look at their secondary, I don't think they're going to be tested too much in this one. Christopher Smith, Dan Jackson, some of those safeties, I think they'll have it pretty easy there. Malachi Starks, though, 5-star true freshman, 25 tackles, 2 picks, 4 pass breakups. He's been terrific this year. Outside as a corner for them. Top to bottom, Georgia defense, they're as tough, they're as physical, they're as, full playmakers as last season, Nick. What are your expectations in this game? Because I don't think they'll have too many issues against the pass, but, I think Florida certainly can bring it to them in the trenches, and that's going to be the key in this game.
We expected Georgia's defense to take a step back, considering all the talent they lost from last year, but it's kind of hard to gauge how much of a step back they've actually taken. They really haven't played many talented offenses so far this season. And the stats, it's kind of hard to tell whether or not this defense is taking a huge step back or just a smaller step back. A guy like Malachi Starks, who's a 5-star true freshman who's starting in 25 total tackles, 4 pass breaks with 2 interceptions. Ridiculous numbers from a guy like him. I like what this linebacking core has done at times. I just think the front 7, I don't know if the front 7 is really where I thought they'd be. I knew they would be taking a step back, but this committee kind of spreading out the love here. Nazir Stackhouse, I want to see more out of him. Only 10 total tackles. I want to see if he can get involved a little bit more. Jalen Carter, of course, is the big name on the defensive line. Been battling a few injuries here and there, but he's only got 5 total tackles on the season because they really have spread the wealth here. Brenton Williams, they each got 9 total tackles. Zion Luge, 8 total tackles for him. Nolan Smith is the guy that's getting after the quarterback. 3 sacks for him. I really like what Smith can do. He is a guy I want to watch on Saturday because, like you said, his draft stock can certainly get an improvement if he gets after the quarterback a few times, gets a nice couple of hits on Anthony Richardson. This defense, it's as good as it should be, but it's really hard to tell considering how strong they were last year. Like I said, expected a step back. I don't know how much of a step back they've taken. They really haven't been tested yet so far this season. I want to see how they look against Tennessee before I make a full judgment on this defense. This is a nice opportunity to kind of get comfortable, get warmed up a little bit against a running attack that is solid on the ground before they go against that juggernaut offense in Tennessee in 2 weeks from this past weekend. The jury is still out for me on this Georgia defense.
Of course, they also have Keely Ringo anchoring one of the cornerback positions. He's a high riser for next year's draft. I do think one thing for Florida is Justin Shorter, his size and his ability to be physical at times. That's something they need to take advantage of, one-on-one opportunities. That's going to be their best opportunity to win downfield. Moving to team comparisons, I think for the most part, Georgia has the edge all across the board. Other than the offensive line, I think Florida edges them out in that one. And I think Florida has earned that. Georgia fans might be a little upset with that one, but I think the Florida offensive line, also maybe the Kentucky game, they've really been big time enforcing unit, especially if what is pretty much a one-dimensional offense too. A quarterback that does not make great decisions and turns it over a lot. I think this offensive line, they've certainly held up a good bit this year, and I think that they can have a really good impact on this game. That's going to be their best opportunity to win. Other than that, do you agree with what I'm thinking on these team comps? I think it's Georgia across the board, other than on that offensive line.
I agree with you in Georgia across the board. I think Georgia's defense is leaps and bounds better than Florida, even if I'm still a bit weary on them. I think their offense is just so much good variety. The offensive line, though, for Florida is impressive. This is a huge bright spot. We knew their offensive line would be good. Billy Napier, is known for having solid offensive lines in the past. I like this offensive line a whole lot. Very talented, very strong so far this year for Florida. They take the edge there for me. I agree with you on that one. But, Georgia is so talented top to bottom, even if I'm a bit weary on the defense. So I think this is a fair comparison.
We're going to final thoughts on the prediction on this one. I think the keys to the game for Florida, I mean, you can say this every game about every team and every game, but obviously they're going to have to slow down the run and put Georgia in these third and long situations and give Brenton Cox an opportunity to work some magic, maybe get a strip sack or two, to really set up this offense for success. And obviously, we kept harping on the O-line. That's their best chance to win. They're going to have to ground and pound in this one. Get, kind of like the Utah game. You have Anthony Richardson get out of the pocket, comfortable throws. If you're running the ball, it's going to be much easier for him to do that. And I think that's a great opportunity for Florida. I think Richardson, I really have a lot more faith in him if they're running the ball and he can, be comfortable and make some plays out of the pocket against the zone coverage and, second and third and short and whatnot. For Georgia, I mean, it's really just play your game, be dominant up front and the defensive front, and then, just continue to dominate time of possession. It's really going to be the key. I'm going to go Georgia 35-17. I think Florida will hang in this one quite a bit as long as Richardson doesn't turn it over. I really think Florida can win this game. Obviously, a lot of people laugh at that. 22.5-point underdogs. Last year, they were supposed to get beat even worse than that, though. And again, it was almost 3-0 at the half. So I think Florida's going to hang in there. I think they can potentially win this game. It seems like every single year it's decided by at least 2 touchdowns or more. This rivalry is never close one bit. I do think Florida can hang in there a little bit. I know you have Georgia winning, but what is your score on this one? How long do you think Florida can hang around for?
I actually have a score pretty similar to yours. I'm going to go 38-20. I think they will cover the 21.5-point spread. That Florida will cover that. This rivalry is weird. It's been a couple of blowouts here and there. But, this Florida team did beat Georgia in 2020. If the crazy things happen in a rivalry game, neutral site, I think Florida can certainly hang around. I think as long as their ground game is hitting the stride early on, I think they have an opportunity to hang around and score 20 points on a Georgia team. It has looked weird at some times. Of course, the Kent State game and the Mizzou game, they look kind of bit not what you expect out of Georgia. So I think this game could have some weird kind of vibes to it and give Florida a potential to hang around. But I think Georgia will come out winners in the end. But 22.5 points is a lot of points to cover for Georgia, and I think Florida will cover that spread easily.
Big time opportunity to learn a lot about Georgia in this one as well, especially with Tennessee next week. So obviously, they haven't had too much of an impressive schedule since Oregon, which I think that game would be a much different score if they played today. But since then, it's been kind of a mixed bag, like you said. Hard to gauge this team, but we'll certainly learn here over the next few. I'm glad to see Georgia having some tough opponents here. That's going to be it for today's episode, guys. Nick, as always, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, I like this rivalry. It's one of my favorite rivalries in college football. Neutral site, exciting game in Jacksonville. I'm looking forward to this one on Saturday.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.